In the serene neighborhood of Willowbend Grove, just 30 minutes outside downtown Atlanta, morning routines were almost sacred. Sprinklers whispered to manicured lawns, coffee steam curled into the dawn air, and kids in pastel polos chased each other between swings and sidewalks. It was a picture of calm, a living postcard of suburban tranquility. But beneath the pristine facade of this neighborhood, a storm had already begun to gather, invisible yet inevitable. When Mariah Gaines moved into Willowbend Grove, she did so with a quiet kind of pride. A 36-year-old black woman with a sterling career in federal law enforcement, Mariah wasn't looking to make headlines or prove anything to anyone. She had spent over a decade with the FBI, becoming one of their top agents in dismantling extremist domestic networks, particularly those rooted in white supremacy. Mariah had seen things most people couldn't even imagine, and still, all she wanted now was peace, a quiet porch, a safe community, and a neighborhood where she could exhale. She bought a classic brick home on a tree-lined cul-de-sac. It was modest, nothing flashy, but it had a wraparound porch and enough space for the garden she'd always talked about planting. Willowbend Grove seemed diverse, friendly, progressive even. Neighbors waved. Kids played in integrated groups. And Mariah, despite the hardened instincts her job had carved into her, allowed herself to relax. But not everyone was thrilled by her arrival. Officer Brian Cutter had patrolled Willowbend Grove for 8 years. He was a local cop with a stainless badge and a reputation for being by the book. But beneath that professional polish was something far darker. Before he joined the force, Cutter had ridden with a biker gang known as the Steel Harbingers, a group notorious for racially motivated violence. When the gang disbanded during a federal crackdown, Cutter reinvented himself by trading in leather for a uniform. The only thing that changed was the armor he wore. Now it had a badge on it. Cutter saw Mariah not as a new neighbor, but as a threat to his twisted sense of order. A successful black woman? In his neighborhood? The very idea churned in his gut like battery acid. To him, her presence was a provocation, and he began to monitor her in ways no officer should. At first, it was subtle. Cutter parked a few houses down and lingered under the guise of patrol. He watched her leave for work. He took notes. He followed her on foot when she jogged the neighborhood trail. He'd wait until dusk and then drive slowly past her home with his headlights off. He even keyed her mailbox open one day and tampered with the locks on her back gate. Mariah noticed. Of course she noticed. She hadn't risen to the top of her field by ignoring her gut. Trash cans misplaced. Tire pressure inexplicably low. A shadow where there shouldn't be one. Her porch light was smashed one night. And then came the letter. No return address. A single line written in all caps. You don't belong here. That was the turning point. Mariah installed security cameras. She began documenting everything. Times, dates, even small changes in her environment. Her calm remained intact, but her instincts screamed. Someone was stalking her, trying to intimidate her. And that someone was too comfortable operating in the dark. Then came the night of the breach. It was raining, a hard, relentless southern downpour that turned sidewalks into streams and muffled even the sharpest sounds. Mariah had just brewed tea when there was a thunderous knock at her door. She checked the camera feed. It was Cutter, but he wasn't in uniform. I'm responding to a disturbance, he yelled through the door. What disturbance? Mariah asked, her voice steady. Let me in. I need to check the premises. When she opened the door slightly to speak through the gap, Cutter shoved his way in with the force of a battering ram. He reeked of wet leather and stale smoke. His hand went immediately to the firearm at his waist. You don't belong here, you lying bitch, he snarled, spittle hitting her cheek. He lunged. But Cutter had made the fatal mistake of thinking Mariah Gaines was a civilian. She wasn't. She was FBI, trained in close-quarters combat, threat de-escalation, and firearms control. In under 5 seconds, Mariah countered, elbowed, pivoted, and disarmed him. She had him face down on her living room floor with his own weapon trained at the base of his skull. Then she drew her badge from the side drawer. Federal agent, she said coldly. You just made the worst mistake of your life. Within minutes, Mariah had contacted both the local precinct and the Bureau's Internal Affairs Division. Cutter, dazed and bleeding from a forehead gash he'd earned during the scuffle, was arrested on the spot. He said nothing. Not because he was remorseful, but because, in that moment, he understood that his mask had fallen. The fallout was swift and seismic. Local media broke the story within hours. National outlets picked it up within days. Headlines screamed with terms like hate crime, systemic rot, and abuse of power. Mariah handed over weeks' worth of surveillance footage, tampered mail, and photographic evidence of vandalism. Internal Affairs unearthed years of buried complaints against Cutter, use of force incidents, racial slurs logged but never addressed, disproportionate stops of black residents. Then came the bombshell, a sealed file from 15 years earlier linked Cutter directly to multiple unsolved hate crimes committed by the Steel Harbingers. The FBI opened a federal probe not only into Cutter, but into his precinct. A full-blown investigation exposed a culture of silence, cover-ups, and complicity stretching back a decade. Protests erupted outside the police department. Thousands filled the streets with signs that read, "Justice for Mariah. Dignity in uniform. Reform now." Mariah, while still recovering from the trauma, stepped forward with resolute grace. She gave interviews, issued statements, and spoke at town halls. She reminded the public that justice wasn't just punitive, it had to be preventive. No one should need a federal badge to feel safe in their own home, she said in one televised address. Safety isn't a privilege. It's a right. When the trial began, every seat in the courthouse was filled. Cutter's attorneys tried to portray him as a once loyal officer who'd made a tragic misjudgment. But the evidence was airtight. Testimonies from previous victims, damning recordings, hate group associations, it all converged into a portrait of a man who had weaponized authority for personal hate. Mariah's testimony was calm, detailed, and devastating. The jury didn't deliberate long. Cutter was found guilty on all counts: unlawful entry, attempted murder, civil rights violations, and hate-motivated assault. He was sentenced to life without parole. The judge, in a rare moment of candor, called him a symptom of unchecked hate in uniform. But the story didn't end in that courtroom. Within weeks of the verdict, the police chief resigned. 3 officers were fired. A federal monitor was appointed to oversee the department. Willow Bend Grove, ashamed yet galvanized, turned inward. The residents who had once waved but remained silent now organized. Community watches were restructured. Diversity councils were formed. Local kids painted murals on public buildings, vivid portraits of unity, resilience, and hope. And then came the candlelight vigil. Hundreds gathered at the community park, each holding a flickering light. There were tears, apologies, embraces between neighbors who'd never spoken before. And standing at the center was Mariah Gaines. She stepped up to the mic, her voice steady despite the swell of emotion. "I moved here to find peace," she said. "What I found was a fight. But in that fight, I also found allies. I found courage I didn't know I'd need, and a community I didn't know I could trust. Tonight is proof that hate can't survive where light gathers." The crowd applauded, some weeping openly. Inspired by Mariah's grace, Willow Bend Grove launched a permanent program called Brighter Grounds, a coalition devoted to racial justice, community healing, and education. They offered workshops, school talks, and support services for those affected by bias or harassment. Mariah served as its first director. Her career also took a new turn. Promoted to lead a special interagency task force on hate crimes, she used her voice to influence legislation, training programs, and policy reform across law enforcement sectors nationwide. She turned her pain into policy. She turned fear into fire. She turned a violent home invasion into a movement that spanned beyond her zip code, her state, and even her agency. Willow Bend Grove, once just another suburb, became a symbol, not of what had happened, but of how a community could respond when it decided to grow instead of deny, to heal instead of forget. And Mariah Gaines, the woman they once tried to scare into silence, became the reason they found their voice.